Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so glad to have you with us tonight. We will give it a few more minutes for folks to trickle in, but we really appreciate you taking the time out of your Thursday to join us at Oxy and to learn a little bit about not just the college experience, but really for a conversation today around social justice and equity work on campus and how it kind of fits into the history of the institution and the work that we really do across majors. So we will give it a few more minutes for folks to make their way over. In the meantime, though, I wanted to say that I hope you are all doing well. I know this is going to be primarily seniors in the room, and I feel like the end of October can be an especially dynamic time in your senior year, as we're working on applications and also midterms. And so I just so appreciate you all taking the time to really get to know, the schools that you're applying to a little bit more deeply and kind of beyond the traditional information session. I think that this is a really exciting opportunity for you to not just explore schools, but also kind of explore your own values and the own work that you would like to see yourself doing in college. And the college search process in so many ways is a very intentional moment in time where you get to make a decision about where you want to see yourself and the kind of work you want to see yourself doing. So thank you all, and may that really kind of guide you over the next few months. It looks like our numbers have plateaued a bit, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Julius. I'm an admission counselor here at Oxy. I'm also an alum of the college, and I am joined by a few current Oxy students who are going to be sharing their experiences and their observations with us. Before we get started, though, I do want to let you know that we will be sharing links in the chat box that you're going to be able to follow along with. But if you do have questions for our panelists, you are welcome to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask those questions, either of me or of our panelists, and we will leave about 15 minutes at the end to have that conversation. Before I fully get started, though, I'd love for our students joining us to introduce themselves. So Isabel, do you want to go first and just tell us your name and where home is for you and what you're studying at Oxy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isabel. I'm a senior at Oxy, originally from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a critical theory and social justice major and an urban environmental policy minor.
Awesome. Karina, do you want to go next?
Hi, y'all. I'm Karina. My AC is pretty loud in the back, so I'm sorry if you can hear that. A senior psychology major. I grew up in LA.
Awesome. Katrina?
Hey y'all, my name is Katrina. I'm originally from Thornton, Colorado. I'm a senior here studying diplomacy and world affairs, as well as minors in Black studies and economics.
Awesome. And then Kara, why don't you round this out?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Kara. I'm a senior as well. I am a diplomacy and world affairs major and a Black studies minor, and I'm from Los Angeles. So yeah.
Perfect. And my screen is still sharing, right? You're also seeing my screen. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Well, then let's kind of jump into it. That's right. We are here to really kind of explore social justice and what that means at Oxy in the classroom, but more broadly on campus. And the reason I was excited to kind of do this presentation and conversation is because I feel like social justice is a phrase that we talk about a lot, not just at Oxy, but at many schools. That is kind of the big buzzwords, social justice, diversity, and equity initiatives. And it is such an integral part in the Oxy experience that I wanted to create space for us to really kind of unpack what that means and what that looks like and how it shows up on campus. To really have that conversation, though, I feel like requires a bit of an understanding of Oxy's history. So within the next kind of 5 minutes, hopefully, I will kind of do a bit of justice to what Oxy's legacy has been over the last 130 years. Oxy was initially founded in 1887, as a liberal arts college in Los Angeles. And actually, there was a critical theory and social justice class that Professor Donna Maeda led in 2014 that really analyzed the college's history since its beginning through a lens of diversity and equity work, understanding kind of how justice and conflict existed around at Oxy and how identity and our definitions of identity have changed. So a lot of the slides that I'm pulling up and content that I'm going off of is based on the work that this class actually spent their semester doing, pulling through yearbooks and articles and documents from Board of Trustees meetings and student government meetings over the last 100 years, which is fascinating work. I feel like you really start to see Oxy's initial engagement with social justice, kind of writ large, in the 1910s, when there was actually a movement to make Oxy an all-male institution. Oxy was founded as a co-ed institution and was co-ed for the first 35 years or so of its existence. In 1913, there was a conversation at the Board of Trustees level to make the college an all-male school. And the student faculty, the students, men and women, as well as the faculty and staff, actually took to the campus in protest. They chalked the quad. This is a group of students in front of the chemistry building with signs, everything for, I'm trying to read their signs now, but advocating for coeducation, and is interesting to see that thread, which, while coeducation is not a issue anymore, gender equity is still something that continues to surface as a conversation in colleges across the country. You next kind of see Oxy engage in real kind of social justice action and discourse in 1940s as a result of World War II and the executive order issued by President Roosevelt to relocate Japanese Americans on the West Coast to internment camps across kind of the western half of the country. And so Oxy actually joined in with a handful of other schools on the West Coast to send students to liberal arts colleges located in the East Coast, in the Midwest. Oxy Japanese American students went to Worcester College, they went to Knox and Oberlin, which provided kind of a sanctuary campus. And it was also the first time that Oxy students broadly, based on kind of the research I did and that Professor Midas class did, kind of developed their social cognizance, really began to understand what it means to be a predominantly white institution and to have students of color on campus. This is not the end of the conversation, but very much the beginning. You then see this kind of dialogue continue through the 60s and 70s as racial politics took center stage, not just at Oxy, but across the country. We had Martin Luther King Jr. come to campus in 1968 and speak in Thorne Hall about racial equity and our role as students at Occidental in making the campus an equitable place. This was followed by having Cesar Chavez come to campus in the early 70s, talking about the farm workers strike and how students can be a part of the movement, which actually led to a student-wide boycott of non-union lettuce. Where about 50% of Oxy students refused to eat the lettuce in the dining hall when they found out it was being purchased by non-union farmers, which is fascinating. It also led the creation of a Black student caucus, where students were able to really come together and say, what are our demands to make Oxy a more equitable place? And a lot of these demands are demands that in some ways have been satisfied, but in other ways continue to show up through the decades. Everything from asking for an increase in faculty of color on campus to the creation of more classes that center Black and African studies, to increased funding to support program around for the Black Student Caucus primarily. And this is the cover of the Occidental paper in 1969, which really focused on race and identity at Oxy. I mean, it is interesting in so many ways, and I'm sure students will kind of jump in, but these are not conversations that have gone away. I mean, these articles read so contemporarily in ways that are fascinating. So this is not done just in an Oxy vacuum. Oxy students still are very tuned into the world around. Oxy students actually protested, and 13 students were suspended in the late 1960s protesting military recruitment on campus, where military recruiters could come to campus and try and get students to enlist. And so they occupied the quad. They told the administration that this is not a place where we want military presence. And this is a thread that really continued through the 80s in apartheid and other other movements and moments in time. In fact, our President Barack Obama actually got his start at Oxy in the 80s, protesting against apartheid. And he gave his first political speech right on the steps of the administrative building. You can actually see him tucked away right there. I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, but on the side of the steps. And in his sort of political speech, he had two white students dress up as paramilitary guards to reflect, kind of the state of apartheid in South Africa, and had them drag him off of the steps midway through his speech, which is some fascinating Oxy trivia. So this continues really throughout the 2000s. In 2012 and 2013, there was a spinoff of the Occupy Wall Street movement that called 99 Rise, which found its way to Los Angeles and Oxy's campus, where students would go into financial institutions like Bank of America in downtown LA and chain themselves to the door and say, we want to take dark money out of politics. They would tape, dollar bills over their face to show the silencing, that happens when we have dark money, sponsoring and backing political figures, and many of them, got arrested, in kind of their acts of civil disobedience. Other movements and causes have certainly come up in the last 20 years, everything from divestment in fossil fuel to divestment from Israel, in response to the occupation of the West Bank, all the way through in 2015 when I was actually a senior at Oxy, and as part of a national conversation that was really analyzing how students support or fail to support students of color on campus. There was a protest in the Quad that turned into a week-long occupation of the administrative building, organized by CODE, which stood for a Coalition of Oxy Students for Diversity and Equity. And they had a list of demands that ranged for everything from the creation of a chief diversity officer at the vice presidential level of the college, to the creation of a Black Studies major, to the allocation of almost $100,000, about $60,000, I think, in programming for the Diversity and Equity Board of Student Government, as well as a commitment to increase the number of faculty on campus. And I think this work continues to not just take place on campus, but really to be informed in the coursework we do as students at Oxy. I think we really are learning about subjects from a range of different disciplines, but understanding and locating why this matters and how we're going to use this knowledge to create change in Los Angeles and around the world, but really internally first, looking at Oxy as our first kind of community, and how can we kind of espouse these values if we don't begin by practicing them on campus. And so I think knowing a bit of that history and context is interesting. And I certainly encourage you to check out those resources if they're interesting. I believe in the chat box, Chelsea shared the website that a lot of those archives are based on that you can continue to explore after the session. But I want to bring this dialogue back now to our student panelists to really begin to unpack what does social justice mean to you? What did it mean to you kind of in high school? Was that something that was on your radar in your college search process? And why don't we start there? Isabel, do you want to kind of kick us off when you were thinking back to when you were a senior in high school?
Choosing a college that had a social justice oriented view on academics and social life was very important to me in the process. Coming from New York, I think I was used to having a lot of diverse perspectives around me at all times. So I wanted to, was a big reason why I chose to go to a school in a metropolitan area. And then also I feel like Oxy offered just really specific majors, like the critical theory and social justice major, that were really centered around things I cared about. And I knew I wanted to work in a field that was oriented around social justice. So I felt like Oxy was the perfect place for that.
Oh, awesome. Katrina, how about you? What did kind of your understanding of social justice mean or look like, and how did that kind of change during your time at Oxy?
Yeah, I feel like growing up, social justice, I didn't quite have the language for it. I don't think me or my peers ever really quite had the language for it, but we just knew that a lot of the experiences we had. So I grew up in a very mixed immigration status community where some family members would have US documents that would make them US citizens, some wouldn't. And just growing up in that environment, growing up low income, we all kind of had this sense that this isn't okay, what's going on, kind of our family situations. And so we would look to education to be okay, well, we'll go to college and then we'll come back and kind of change the community. I don't think I really had the language that social justice or resistance was something that I wanted or valued until the summer of my junior year. Before I became a senior, when I participated in the Leadership Enterprise for Diverse America summer program, LEADA. And that's when I kind of got more of the language. And when I was starting to craft my college list, working with them, I started to see that the schools I wanted to be a part of, similar to what Isabel said, were schools that cared about those things and schools where I could further explore the interest. Hence being a diplomacy and world affairs major, like wanting to kind of see justice for the rest of the world, that I wasn't quite getting to see like in my current education, or just, yeah, learning about US history, international history, and being like, there's a lot of wrong things that the US has done. And I want to like figure out like, not what those things are, but like, how do we fix it? So like Oxy became like a key place for that.
Awesome. And I definitely want to come back later to how DWA, Diplomacy and World Affairs, intersects with justice, because we sometimes don't think of like international relations or politics as necessarily being compatible with equity in the same way. But Karina, you were doing a lot of nodding, so I'm curious if what Katrina was saying rang true for you, or if it did, or how so, how kind of you interpret the question.
Yeah, no, Katrina hit like all the points. I wanted to add on that Oxy, like my mom went to Oxy, and even what she like grew up in Japan, and then she came over for college. So like hearing her experiences of how students were still socially active during that time period as well in the 80s. That's something that I wanted, and literally everything that Katrina and Isabel already have said. But like coming to Oxy, there's more space for conversations and people who have lived experiences, and they share those stories. And I think that's a really important part of going to Oxy. Some other schools, their demographic don't have those experiences. And at Oxy, people are literally living these lives, and it's not just a statistic, it's a person. And through psychology, I'm learning more and more about like the social cultural aspects of psychology and the different roles that play a part of psychology, and like diagnosing certain mental illnesses, and like how each culture or gender or identity in general plays a really big part in mental health. So yeah,
that's fascinating. Kara, anything to add? Was social justice even was it on your radar when you were in the college search process? How did it kind of factor into your knowledge of Oxy?
Yeah, I mean, coming from, I guess I kind of lied earlier when I said I'm from LA. I'm from like an hour outside of LA. And honestly, social justice was not like my focus coming to Oxy either way. But it was something that I had considered. For me, really, it was just wanting to be closer to the city that I've been near to this whole time, wanting to kind of explore what it's like and what the people are like. And in doing that, in coming to Oxy, you just kind of get caught up in the social justice aspect, because it's just not possible to live in LA and ignore like the many problems that it has, as it is in like most cities. So just coming to LA, I just kind of got caught up, especially working. I worked in the mayor's office over the summer. We did a lot of work concerning like the city of LA and telling its hidden histories and like repairing the trust between constituents and the city. So while going into Oxy, I don't think it was on my radar. Once you get to Oxy, there's just no way to really ignore it, I'd say.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And let's also circle back to that. Actually, this is probably a good time to talk about, I mean, first and foremost, how it kind of comes in. I mean, I think, yes, it is in the culture, it's in the ethos, but it also happens in the classes. And like you said, Isabel, I mean, not many schools will have a major called critical theory and social justice, and I'm just curious if you could kind of give us your best definition of what the department like is. When someone says, what is critical theory and social justice, how would you explain it as a department? Because it is, I think, kind of a broad way to capture a lot of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say most generally, people define it as a major that's interrogating systems of power. So that can look like a lot of things. And I feel like our different faculty members represent like very different ways of doing that. So we have like a politics professor, a psychology, like a clinical psychologist, like teacher, someone who's worked in like the human rights field globally. So I feel like it's really all those areas, but like with a critical lens, and looking at kind of how you could be a person who actively joins those areas of work and is thinking critically and engaging with how systems of power are affecting the people you're working for. So like I'm in a class right now about the nuclear politics of the Middle East, and our final assignment is to say what we would do in a situation where we're at like a company like Human Rights Watch, and they're talking about like implementing like gay rights narratives in like Afghanistan, and how we would mitigate some of the harm that would be caused in that room by people who are ignorant to like the situation and in Afghanistan and what like the people in Afghanistan actually want, and how they want to be able to advocate for themselves. So that's like a very like CTSJ example of like what the students are learning to do in the department.
No, I think that's a great example. Really. And let's go back to care, because you started to talk about kind of your internship with diplomacy and world affairs with the mayor's office. And so if you wouldn't mind kind of first explaining what that internship was, but then kind of explaining, I mean, you did a little kind of the social, issues that are in Los Angeles, but really kind of what, why that is necessarily like in this house of diplomacy or international relations, like, right? Why is it global, but also local?
Yeah, okay. Well, diplomacy and world affairs is essentially like our version of international relations. It's just the focus on like the global focus rather than just a domestic focus, but also ways in which global norms can be applied domestically. So the reason that I ended up working in the mayor's office is because there are these UN goals called Sustainable Development Goals that are supposed to be reached by 2050, presumably. And so essentially the goal that I worked on, which was peaceful cities, was a class I took over the spring semester of last year, where we worked with the city of LA, the mayor's office, to implement this norm in the city of LA. And so I got my start over the spring semester. We delivered a report with like a couple recommendations, and then they liked my work. So they said, why don't you come work on over the summer? And so throughout the summer, we were working on how to tell LA's hidden histories, hidden narratives that are just glossed over throughout its past, to address these concerns, like to initiate truth-telling processes in the city of LA, memorialize works and stuff like that in order to kind of repair this broken trust between the constituents in the city. That's like a very common tale within like various cities. So we basically just worked on that throughout the summer, and then we delivered a report and a website back to city recommendations, and now we're helping them throughout this semester implement those. So overall, just like my experience was just working with all these academics, working with my professor on how to basically get this done and how to make it as holistic and inclusive as possible, because at the end of the day, what we tried to do was make it as community-based as possible from the ground up, because the people who know what's best for them are the people. So we tried to implement that in every kind of aspect of our work.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah, I've heard you talk about it before, but not quite that in depth. How is it kind of, does it exist on a like web platform, or like these truth-telling, processes? Is it an in-person like process, or what kind of are the actual steps of it?
Yeah, well, the main primary like method of initiating like truth-telling processes is this thing called truth circles, in which like basically the city would gather people affected by various harms done by the city and bring them into rooms with like people who are really well trained in like truth-telling processes, and have them kind of just speak on what they need, what they want, what has been done to them, and kind of bring this awareness to the city that they probably had either ignored or didn't know about, and in order to like figure out what the people want out of the process. So essentially all of our recommendations were just like ask the people, essentially. Yeah.
No, I think it's interesting work. Katrina, you're also majoring in diplomacy and world affairs, but you're minoring in, remind me your minors?
Black studies and econ.
Okay, no, that's what I thought. I'm curious. I mean, we talk about oftentimes at Oxy that like there's only about a third of your courses are going to be major requirements. Students are going to be taking classes in kind of a range of different disciplines and subjects. And so I'm curious for you, Katrina, how you've kind of seen this idea of equity work show up in these pretty different disciplines. I mean, it's kind of, I guess, social science, humanities based, but I'd say they're pretty, unique. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what shows up where. I think a lot of like my focus in diplomacy and world affairs, and like why I was drawn to the major, was like wanting to focus on sub-Saharan Africa, having two parents from like that region, like really wanting to like hone in on that and like focus on like how do we repair the harms of colonialism is mainly like my big goal. But I think like Black studies has helped me in the sense of like understanding just the importance of history and being able to tie that into my conversations in DWA. I think the good thing about like Oxy classes is you'll have people who come to classes and bring so many different perspectives. So you'll have kind of like different and new ways of thinking about things that may not be already highlighted in the syllabi. Students will bring up those critical perspectives. And I think like Black studies helps me to bring that up in diplomacy and world affairs. But then I think like diplomacy and world affairs combined with what I've like learned with Black studies has helped me in economics courses and understanding like, how do we think deeper about this? And when questions come like in the 300 level courses about like equity, is this equitable? I'm able to like answer to those and like provide that lens, which I think is really helpful, but then also see like the limits of economics and how like sometimes the systems and economics that are upholded, especially when you first like enter the minor or the major, really do go against like the equity things that are mentioned sometimes in diplomacy and world affairs, but especially in like Black studies. So I don't know, it's helpful. It kind of gives like a well-rounded, it kind of sounds like a lot to like carry in one brain now that I like say it out loud, but yeah.
No, I think that's a great job of, and really framing why I think we find so much value in having a curriculum where students are going to take classes in different areas, because the assumptions that those disciplines make, even if they're addressing similar problems, similar issues, make different assumptions that kind of change the foundation of what that work looks like. So Karina, psychology, exactly. Did you know you were going to do psychology coming into Oxy, or first of all, how did that kind of fall into your?
Yes, but no, or I guess no, but yes. I originally came in as a kinesiology major, and then I took chemistry and I took calculus and I took biology and anatomy, and I was like, this is not for me. And I took a psychology class and I absolutely fell in love. My 101 class is actually with my advisor, and now I do research with her. And just that 101 class, it clicked with me. It made sense. And all the classes that I've taken since have heightened my love for psychology. I'm actually going to go into a master's program for counseling. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and just since I know you've been doing kind of research with a professor in the psych department, could you tell us a little bit about what that research is, what it looks like, how it kind of became your topic of passion or of interest?
Of course. So I do research with Professor Cabral. We do health psychology research. And in the past, we have done studies on e-cigarette use, safe sex conversations with young adults. The most recent one we did was a mother-daughter conversation between parents and guardians, I guess, and talking about like sex and that conversation of, are you having safe sex? Are you getting those what's called vaccinations to prevent diseases that are coming up? And we focused a lot on Latina women and the conversations between those people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I mean, excited to talk about kind of your goals and everyone's goals for life after graduation. I realize I've got a room full of seniors, so there's a lot of forward thinking, I'm sure, happening this semester. But Isabel, I realized after you had explained, kind of critical theory and social justice, you're also in urban and environmental policy. I guess as a minor, but I feel like those two disciplines I always find to be so interesting in that they are both similar, but also on very opposite ends of the spectrum. And that CTSJ, critical theory and social justice, always, at least felt to me, very conceptual, talking about these ideas, around power that is, engaging, but hard to kind of see, or, borders or identity. Whereas urban environmental policy, I always felt was much more of a boots on the ground, roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty kind of program. So I guess how would you kind of, I mean, maybe I'm off, but how would you define urban environmental policy, and where do you kind of see these two interfacing off of each other?
Yeah, I think you did a good job of describing it. I think urban environmental policy is very focused on policy. I would describe like the classes I take as focused on like community organizing or public policy and politics. So I would say that the biggest thing that differentiates urban environmental policy as a major from like other like politics or policy classes is that it's like very focused in city issues and equity in cities, in urban areas. And I would say that part of the reason why it's my minor, not my major, is because I like the conceptual stuff more. But I also feel like being a part of the UEPI Institute has been really helpful to get hands-on experience. And I feel like they're so well resourced in their connections to LA and involving their students in LA in a way that's really helpful for when people graduate. So I was able to do an internship at a labor union when my sophomore year, like really early on, through the UEP Institute. So I feel like I've been able to get more hands-on experience, but also CTSJ has offered me a lot of hands-on experience in the same way. And I think they're growing the department to be more centered around that now.
Yeah, no, I would imagine so. I mean, it's critical theory and social justice is one of those majors that can lend itself to so many different things. And in fact, I believe they just announced last year kind of their recipient of the departmental like alumni award, who is actually working in Capitol Hill, with Nancy Pelosi as the ombudsman for whistleblowers within Congress. So it is, it is, I mean, in so many ways, kind of equity in action. And what labor union were you working with? I don't think I knew that about you.
I worked with the California Nurses Association in Glendale. Yeah.
Gosh, I'm sure now is a particularly exciting time to be in I mean any sort of health care union. So you probably missed a lot of the fireworks with that. Well, I know that your Oxy experiences were in a lot of ways interrupted by the pandemic. That is not lost on us, on me. That you all were second semester sophomores, I believe, when you were kind of asked to leave, and Oxy was fully virtual for the last year during the pandemic. So your relationship to the campus might look a little removed, but I am curious kind of how you have seen these bigger ideas of equity and justice that we talk a lot about kind of in applied to Los Angeles or to marginalized communities, how you see them kind of taking space within our own campus, and how students talk about issues at Oxy or really the institution itself. And if anyone has a good place that they want to start, you're welcome to kind of unmute yourself. But yeah, let's kind of bring it back to campus. Karina, do you want to go first? Sorry. Yeah.
I can start and then somebody can just take it over for me. I definitely see it in the conversations that are had and just within clubs of social media, especially, and promoting more, I guess, conversations about the different topics. Like specifically the Black Lives Matter protests last summer. A lot of Oxy students were involved in that, and they made an effort to show up for their friends and for their community. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Katrina, were you in the queue? Did you have?
Yeah, I think for me, it is like it's within the conversations. I think specifically the conversations I have with Black students is like understanding our roles on this campus. And like a lot of us kind of do have like well-meaning and want to be causing less harm to the world as much as possible, but then also like interrogating our own positionality on campus, I think is what I tend to see more. So when we're not like already organizing and trying to get things to be more equitable and fair, like just on campus for us and our needs and like the needs of the students who come after us, like really thinking critically about like how we engage with Oxy and whether that like outside of Oxy with our engagement with LA, engagement with the world is like actually putting forward social justice, like reinterrogating our roles as students and like really trying to look further in ways that we can like minimize that harm. That's not just us, reading these texts. I think sometimes at Oxy can be easy to get caught up in the text and like be like, okay, like these are what the readings are saying and this is what the paper I have to write is saying. And you can get very caught up in the academic side of it, but then stop to interrogate, like, okay, what's the real world impacts of the readings? Like, I'm reading about real people and their lives and like how these situations and events have impacted their lives. Like, how do I stop academics from being just fully heady and being more like with the heart? I think is like what I notice, particularly my conversations with Black students, but like students in general, like interrogating and thinking through at Oxy.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, I'm glad both Katrina and Karina, you both kind of mentioned that it's in the conversations. I mean, I think that is a product of in part the kind of students that come to Oxy that are excited to engage in these ideas. I think it's also, and you can tell me how useful or helpful you think these tools are, but all students come to Oxy at the beginning of the year before they even start their first semester for a week-long orientation. Now, obviously, you are not going to be cover everything in a week, but I think that it really is done in part to understand that Oxy students are coming from a lot of different places. You have some students who are coming from urban areas. You have students who are coming from residential high schools in more, rural places. Some students have been engaging in kind of politics throughout high school. Other students, this is their first time having these conversations. And so my understanding, kind of my reflection during my time at Oxy is like, yes, you get this kind of crash course during that first week, but it is really meant to create a framework that you're able to intentionally, kind of continue that dialogue for the next 4 years. I don't know, Kara, Isabel, if you have anything to add, or if you feel like kind of that kind of is how it works, or maybe that isn't how it works, and you feel that like Oxy students do a lot of the work they do in spite of kind of these tools that we on the administrative side try and put in place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go first. Made me lose my train of thought, but I feel like a lot of the professors at Oxy I found to be like very radical in a way that I've really enjoyed throughout my time, and I think that they like really affect their students and the work that they do. And I feel like that puts everyone on a similar page, despite like different backgrounds coming in. But I also feel like people that come to Oxy are like ready to engage and like open as students, and I rarely find students, or I mean, don't want to make like a huge generalization about Oxy students everywhere, but I feel like the students I interact with are students that are open to critique and want to have open conversations. And I also feel like Oxy can offer a really good space for students who've never had the ability to join like an affinity group that aligns with their identity, and they can like find that space at Oxy or in LA, because maybe somewhere in their hometown didn't offer that. Or if you're even like me being from New York, like I feel like I've been able to be like way more open about my identity at Oxy, and with the people I've met here than I would have, even though you could like equate New York and LA as like both very liberal places.
No, I think there's value in that. Oxy is for many students their first time away from home, but also their first time in a city like Los Angeles, and the fact that we're all kind of leading into this residential community of about 2,000 students, most of whom will live on campus for all 4 years. About half of our seniors will choose to live off campus, which does in some ways kind of hopefully engender that kind of space, where you can really explore. But anyway, Kara, you were going to jump in the conversation. And
yeah,
I want you to. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just going to echo a lot of what Katrina said, but especially the fact that Occidental does ground a lot of its work, like the work you do in classes, in reality. And that's a lot of the times where my inspiration comes from when considering like social justice. Like me and Katrina are in a Black political thought class this semester that has made me think about a lot of things concerning like the world that we live in. I've written like plenty of papers on like especially bringing my own interest in, like whenever I am assigned a paper, I just go like, how can I make this Black, essentially? So I do that a lot in my work. And so right now in one of my human rights classes in Latin America, I'm writing about the human rights and police brutality in Brazil, which I had never considered, even though Brazil is like those largest African-American denomination outside of Africa, which I also did not know. So it is not like cool because it's kind of depressing to learn about these things, but like you know what I mean, in that way, and then taking that and extrapolating onto like the US or my local community or wherever I'm at. So like a lot of the inspiration for what I'm thinking about comes from what we're talking about in classes.
Yeah. Very cool. I know your Black political thought class well. I took it my senior year, and it is just as I saw a professor here on campus recently with her, let nobody turn us around book, and it's like, yes, I remember. Then kind of the last question I'll pose to you all, and then we do have some questions coming in the Q&A. Is as seniors and kind of moving forward, I'm not going to ask you what your plan is after graduation, but how do you see kind of the work you've done at Oxy ground you and kind of the work you want to see yourself doing in the future? Were there any major changes or revelations or realizations over the last year or two that you are excited to kind of to enter the next chapter of life with? Does anyone want to go first? I'm seeing some nods. Isabel, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, this past summer I interned actually through an alumni connection at more of like an international relations human rights organization, which I never really thought that I would be that interested in. But it actually like really tied my interest in global politics and like critical theory and social justice. And I think that it helped me really envision like a field that I'd be super interested in, because I think I like more like large scale organizations than like a smaller organization, I think, to like start out. But it also, I feel like, showed me like niches within that career that I'd be interested in pursuing, like psychosocial care in the human rights field and stuff like that. Like, I feel like it gave me more of an idea of like what I'd want to do for graduate school when I do apply, and like what field I would kind of head towards post grad. And I think that was really nice and reassuring to have that experience. But also I think internships can serve the purpose of being like, oh, that's not something I'd like to do. And I think I've also found that in some work experience I've had at Oxy and outside of Oxy.
Exciting. It's exciting to think about life after Oxy. Care, any senior year realizations, thoughts, what may be in store, or what you would like to be in store at least?
Yeah, well, like I've been talking about this entire time, like working with the
Right.
mayor's office last year was definitely like a big, like I didn't know this was possible in a city government kind of thing for me. Like I did not know like these diplomacy, world affairs concepts because I never really wanted to work in politics or like US related fields because just too messy for me. But now knowing that like these kind of things do exist, I was talking with Brenda Shockley, who's like my supervisor at the City of LA Mayor's office. She's super cool. She was in the LA 92 riots, which was just a crazy story to hear about. And she's just like a cool person in general. And then they said they would have me back next year. So hopefully I'll be working there, but also getting a new mayor. So maybe not. But we'll see either way. Yeah.
That is the hard part about working in politics, is that it is all very conditional on who is in fact in power. Katrina, how about you?
Yeah, I think like my time at Oxy, my work at Oxy, like just my coursework has shown me that like the UN isn't where I want to work. Just like my intro classes kind of taught me that, just learning about it and being like, this doesn't make sense. Bringing like the different lenses I have and then further critiquing it in like my later classes. And so that can kind of confirm to me that like there's certain places in the world to work that aren't going to fulfill like the goals I have or like stick true to like the mission I have. So like knowing that that's not for me, I think for me, like if I do continue with law or specifically like advocacy, I know that like those are two big things I want to focus on. But I know in law, I want to make sure that like I'm focusing on the more equitable part of law, and really finding a place within like that system, whether it is like becoming an attorney for a firm, but like finding how I can use like a law degree to like further again my mission of like advocating for other people, social justice, etc. Yeah.
And then Karina, I know you kind of hinted a few times or said a few times, but why don't you remind us kind of what comes next for?
Yeah, of course. So I am applying to graduate programs to get my master's in family and marriage counseling. It's one of my dreams to open my own practice and employ a bunch of BIPOC and POC therapists, because I think it's really important to connect with your therapist on a deeper level than just gender or identity. Race plays a big part in your identity of who you are as a person. And within this practice, I would have a bunch of different types of therapies. So like in my head, I'm thinking bottom floor is exercise therapy. The next level would be like art therapy and music therapy and have a studio there. And then the top level would be CBT, EMDR, and just talk therapy. And also making therapy accessible to people who need it the most. It would be amazing if I could get free mental health services for people who are living on the streets, unhoused folks, and just BIPOC folks in general. So it's a dream. It's going to happen if I put it out into the universe.
Oh, I love it. And best of luck with your graduate school applications. Awesome. Well, this is now the time where we want to kind of hear your questions and myself, but primarily our panelists are eager to share their insights and experiences. And so the first question we'll kind of start off with is from Jack. Thank you, Jack. Who says, I'm very interested in politics and critical theory and was wondering what student organizations are involved in political action at Oxy. And that's a great question. How has kind of this idea of social action, are there clubs or organizations that kind of house that, or where do you find it? Anyone can go first with that.
I think it depends on what part of political activism you want to look at. I think there's actually at Oxy, there's a good mix of students who are like political activism, I guess, within the Oxy sphere, within campus. And you'll find like a lot of organizations like the Diversity and Equity Board are really like attuned to those key issues. And you'll find like a lot of cultural clubs too sometimes will like dabble in that work as far as like activism on campus related to the experiences of Oxy students. But if you're looking for more like politics outside of campus, I guess one club that I can plug real quickly is Oxy 365, I think is the name. And they're an org just focused on like environmental politics, specifically like climate change, going to climate actions, figuring out on Oxy's campus, how can we better like support changing our ways to like be more supportive of like reducing the harmful impacts of climate change, but also like looking further to the community and partnering with other organizations. You'll have organizations like Planned Parenthood that also work on like just reproductive rights. So there's different places everywhere. I named a few, but I feel like other panelists can also jump in and let me know other organizations you can think of.
Other organizations, yeah, Karina, was that a
Yeah, kind of. I don't know very much about it, but I've been seeing a lot about the food justice clubs that we have on campus. Isabel, are you part of that? I don't really know.
Yeah, I was a part of one of them. Yeah.
Period. Then you can talk more about it. I just know that we're having like a food justice month right now. And so people were in the quad today kind of talking about what it means to have food accessible to everybody. And yeah, Isabel, you can kind of take over.
Yeah, I haven't been involved as much this year, but I used to volunteer with the food access recovery team on campus. So they partner a lot with the dining hall and get food waste that's actually like not gone bad, but just is like with the regulations that the dining hall has. Like they have to throw out a bunch of food that's perfectly good. So it was all about like repurposing that food waste. And then we also worked a lot with like local farmers markets in LA. So we would bring a lot of the food to those farmers markets. And then they also just do a lot of like awareness around sustainability in the dining hall and just on campus generally. Also, I'm just thinking about this because it's Empowerment Week this week. Project Safe on campus is constantly working towards like preventing sexual violence and like interacting with the administration and the student body to prevent assault on campus. So I feel like that's been like on everyone's mind this week, and they put on like a whole like they had different events every day. Like yesterday I went to a workshop called Jumping Off the Relationship Escalator with this really cool activist and therapist, Auntie Jada. And it was just this really cool workshop on like relationships and sex and like having like positive relationships and like making sure that like the timeline that like heteronormativity enforces on you, like how to kind of like de-internalize that. And it was just like a really cool break in my day where I got to just discuss with this like relationship therapist. And I was just like in this room with all these cool people who were like interested in it. And like just stuff like that happens a lot at Oxy. And I think that's something that like I won't necessarily be involved in the organization, but I always feel like open to go and do whatever they're doing.
Yeah. Are there more to, I was gonna say, we haven't gotten any new questions yet, which is fine. I have a few clubs that come to mind too, but I'm curious if there's others that you wanted to plug or shout out, Care, Karina. Okay, within politics, or Karina, you go.
I was gonna just say, like, it's not a club on campus, but the LA Mission does really awesome work with people experiencing houselessness in LA. So there's many opportunities to volunteer there. I just dropped off a bunch of food donations over the weekend. So yeah, just plugging them really quick too.
Yeah, and I just what came to mind. No, that is a good plug, and I think that's a good reminder that sometimes a lot of service looks like partnering with organizations that are already doing meaningful work in Los Angeles, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can lend our resources, which tend to be a student's time, and availability, and support, community-based work that is already being done in the city. But another club that did come to mind from your question was the Oxy Students United Against Gentrification, which at least was very active when I was a student, and I've seen it kind of continue to take a place on campus. And really kind of understanding and unpacking our own relationship to our neighborhood of Highland Park, which yes, we are kind of citizens of, but also has been going through its own kind of impact of gentrification and changing demographics and increased cost of living. And so they do a lot of great advocacy work, everything from using campus space to host organizations like the ACLU to provide workshops on what your rights are as tenants when your landlord says he's raising the rent, by 50%. What recourse do you have available to you? Letting folks know when there's a petition for a new alcohol license for a bar, coming to the block. So I think you do see a lot of grassroots work kind of happening that way, very organically. But I always say too that, and don't let me kind of dominate the conversation, that, what is exciting about Oxy, I mean, yes, is that, yes, you see these themes kind of, get passed down from iteration to iteration of Oxy students, but also that every semester, 500 students graduate and 500 students, join the community, and national issues are constantly changing, and LA issues are constantly changing. So on the one hand, these are all old issues, and on the other hand, how we approach them are very different. And so I say that, every year at Oxy looks a little different, and how we take up these issues and how we kind of work with them. Having been at Oxy now for almost a decade, it's like, is very dynamic. And there's always room to kind of grow and create new things. So I definitely want to, it's the end of the day. It's Thursday. I know we've all got a lot going on. I will release you all. But I do want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. And then if there's any final, not questions, but for our panelists, if you have any advice to give to seniors who are in the thick of their application processes, what you don't all have to go, but if anyone has a good piece of advice they would like to share, why don't we try and end on that note?
Look at the courses offered.
You go, Isabel. Sorry, you go. I butchered that. You go, Isabel.
Sorry, it also broke up for me, so sorry if I just started talking randomly. But I would say look at the courses like in the areas you're thinking about studying, and see if like what the department is offering or requiring of you matches up with what you think like the definition of the department is. I think that's like always the one piece of advice I give to students.
Care, did you want to go too?
Sure. I mean, I would just say just like sign up for everything, because like the worst that can happen is you just get a bunch of emails in your inbox. Maybe you get free food going to some event, which is like not too bad. And maybe you discover like what you're really into, which is probably the ideal outcome. So like you don't lose anything by signing up for everything.
Absolutely. Katrina, Karina, how does that, Katrina, what
I
what say
guess
you?
two quick things. One, like try as best as possible to talk to students like in spaces like these, or just like having those just conversations that aren't centered on this is Oxy and Oxy is great because, but like really try to pull those deeper questions on where you're just getting to know the students that you're interacting with at like different colleges, I think is key. And also trust the process. It's gonna be okay. And don't like beat yourself up based on what decisions you make or what decisions get back to you. Like you will end up in a place that like makes sense and is like best for your life path. So don't stress about like those small details, and don't like not get sleep and drink water. Like I know a lot of high school seniors tend not to do around this time because of like application season.
Yeah, Karina, any final thoughts to close us out?
Honestly, you will end up where you need to end up. You will find your people at college. Go in with an open heart, with an open mind. And sometimes it's okay to just listen. And you don't need to contribute all the time. You also don't need to be the loudest in the room to be heard. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for coming.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. I know this is a busy time of year. Thank you to our students in the room for joining. You are always welcome to reach out to admission counselors or also students on our website at our Ask a Student page. So that is all shared in the chat box. Have a good night and be in touch.